that I do in class about foreign language, especially as a second language, English as a second language, and some activities that I do in international business, when teaching international business, to develop also cultural awareness. Well, I'm from Brazil. Yeah, so English is my second language. And I'm at the Department of Management and Entrepreneurship here at Indiana University at Kelley. So as Lavon said, well, I'm going to do a brief introduction, go a little bit deeper in what Lavon said in some of the classes that we teach at Kelley. I'm going to talk about some tools that I use to promote cultural diplomacy and foreign language awareness in my classes. I'm going also to talk a little bit about some of the tools that I used during COVID when we had to shift everything to online, especially one class that I created. It was a virtual study abroad, and then we will have some time for questions. So as Lavon was mentioning before, we have about 10,000 students in our undergraduate course. Every student has to take 3 classes that we call the Global Foundation Score. It's 3 classes about international business, and they are required. So these classes, they give strategies. So they have to analyze the economic, social, cultural environment that drive the global economy. It's usually in the sophomore year. So they do a country analysis, they analyze a region or a country, they evaluate that country, whether the business is suitable to that country or not. And one of the options, so it's 3 courses, and one of them, they can do a study abroad during this sophomore year. So the Global Foundation Score is they either take, well, they have to take D270, it's the Global Business Environment. So here in this class, they learn about the economic, government, the political environment of the country. They learn about culture, how culture impacts global business, and so on. Then they take also D202, Business, Government, and Society. And then D271, that's the Global Business Analysis, that's the country analysis, or D272, that's the Global Business Immersion, that can be the study abroad. So those are required courses at Kelley. So when we talk about the study abroad, actually they can choose, this D272, they can travel to 18 different countries. And well, I take students to Brazil. Actually, next year I'm taking students to the Netherlands. And well, I'm not taking students to Brazil due to COVID. And last year we did it virtually. What I teach at Kelley, D312, I teach building cross-cultural competencies, cross-cultural awareness. I teach doing business in Brazil, which is really interesting because after taking this class, some of the students want to learn Portuguese. I teach the Global Business Immersion, so taking students to Brazil or the Netherlands. And I teach cross-cultural awareness. So that's the virtual study abroad that I'm going to talk here a little bit. That's really when I put students from Kelley with Brazilian students together in a virtual environment. I also take students to Greece at Globase, and I also take students from the MBA program, Kelley Direct, to Brazil. So those are some of the courses that I've been teaching here at Kelley. So study abroad at Kelley, as Lavon was mentioning, we have about 59 programs to 39 different countries. About 65% of our students, they study abroad, and in this D272, so in this global core foundation, which is required, they can study here or they can go abroad. As I mentioned, they can choose one of these 18 options. So for example, now in September or October, they have to apply for that and they choose one of the options to go in the spring, which is really interesting. I take students to Brazil and most of them This is the first time they go abroad. A lot of them don't even have a passport. And after that, they want to go for a semester abroad or for a summer internship abroad. That changes their perspective on studying abroad or even the world, right? So we have many different long-term or short-term study abroad programs, as mentioned here, as Lavon mentioned too. So here I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the tools and activities that I use to promote this cultural diplomacy or cross-cultural awareness. First of all, I really like to use simulations in class, either in the virtual environment or in person. I think that's kind of, especially at the beginning of the semester, some students, they think that they, even after studying abroad, even if they lived abroad, they think they're already, oh, I lived in a different country. I have some international experience. This simulation, I don't know if you've ever used. I even sent here the link and I sent my slides to Raj. Raj, feel free to share. There's this Global Edge source where they have a lot of simulations. And feel free, if you want to send me an email, I can share with you this Xeon simulation with you too. So in this simulation, I have journalists there meet people from a different country, that's the Xeon culture, and they meet at a restaurant. So each student, they have a different role that they read prior to class, and we have a role play. So the Xeons, they have a culture that is very unknown. The journalists, when they meet, they don't know anything about this culture. And it's really interesting how they try to analyze and they, for example, the Xeons, they don't look in the eyes, right? They don't look in the eyes, and looking into their eyes is very uncomfortable. And we here in the US, it's very common for us to look in the eyes. The other thing is they have a very big limitation on English. And we tend to talk a lot or use very complex language skills or very complex phrases or very long sentences, and their English is basic and the Xeons don't understand. So in these simulations, the journalists, they have a goal. They have to enter, they have to be invited to the Xeons for a garden festival. And depending on how the journalists are able to learn about the culture and how they're able to be aware and sensible to this culture, they will be invited or not to this festival. So it's really interesting. In the debriefing of these Xeon simulation is the best part. We usually spend 30 minutes debriefing, and it's mind-blowing what the students learn. It's like, wow, we thought that we were able to understand, or we were able to read the culture, and we learned a lot from the simulation. So that's at the beginning of the class. And we use this for many, many times throughout the class, and we go back to the simulation. So this is, then for the virtual environment.
Please turn your microphones off. Please turn your microphones off.
Then for the virtual environment, for example, I change the simulation for the use of, for example, these reactions for hearts, for other different kinds of things that we adapt or chat instead of what we cannot use in the physical environment. So we are able to use the simulation either for the virtual or the physical environment. Then other things that we can use in class, I use a lot of the frameworks. So for example, Hofstede and Globesmart. I give them the website. So usually my classes, especially in D271 or D312, cross-cultural awareness, they have a lot of readings prior to class. So they have readings, they have assignments or cases. and I combine those frameworks with cases. So in that, we have André Rio, a Dutch firm going to Brazil, and we would compare what is the difference, cultural differences between the Netherlands and Brazil. So they would read the case, and then in class, we would compare the cultural dimensions using frameworks, and we would talk about it. So that would be a way of using frameworks, using the cases, using the theory in a more dynamic and discussion-based model format. I wanted to share with you something that we use at IU, especially at Kelley, that is Globesmart. I think Globesmart is a very useful resource, and it, especially for self-awareness on cultural dimensions. And all our students have access with an IU email. Do you know Globesmart? Have you ever used Globesmart? If you can use here in the chat. I'm going to share here my screen about Globesmart. Well, it's very important when you talk about cultural diplomacy, cultural awareness, that you know yourself first. And it's very important that we understand that there is no right and wrong, that we are just different, especially if you are traveling to a different country, if you're taking students abroad, or even if you don't study international business, you are going to work with different cultures, right? We are going to work in different teams here at Kelley or at work with different cultures, and we are just different, right? There's no right or wrong. So Globesmart is a great tool, and I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to share the resource with you. So let me share Globesmart. So it's a great tool that we use with our students. So this is Globesmart. So first, they can do their own profile. So they can do their profile. I'll log in here. They can do their profile and can compare themselves here. They can compare themselves with different countries, for example. Myself, United States, Brazil, Indiana University average in different cultural dimensions. So here in Globesmart, they use 5 dimensions: independent versus interdependent, egalitarianism and status, risk, certainty, direct versus indirect, task or relationship. And you can compare many different countries. And not only that, you can also do a lot of resource about the country. You can do a lot of research about the country. So you could go to the country and have a culture guide about the country. So here in Brazil, how do Brazilians communicate? And we can explore a lot of that in class or prior to class. So if you are teaching something about leadership and leadership across cultures, or motivation, or communication. So let's go here to leadership. You can see how is effective to, what are the effective leadership styles in Brazil, and then compare with different countries. So here we can actually go and compare Brazil Erica, Brazil, but I can also compare with the United States or compare with India and so on. So Globesmart has a lot of information, has more than 90 countries, and well, we can use for many different topics, and it's very accurate, it's very updated, and has many resources that I use in a lot of my different classes. I would say in D271, in D312, and so on. So let me stop sharing here. And then also in class, it's interesting because they can, well, with self-awareness, they can compare their profiles. It's very important that they study the country before going abroad. There's a lot about communication, topics they should talk about, because it's not only about the language, but also the topics they should talk or not talk, how to communicate, the gestures in communication is not only about verbal communication, but non-verbal communication that Globesmart explores too. So I think this is something important before we take students abroad, is how to prepare them in terms of communication in that country as well. So let me share the other screen again. So Globesmart. So this is the link for you. That will be in the, sorry. Another topic that I explore with them, this is in cross-cultural management, is language, but language, English, especially English as a second language. And I use some of the videos and how to, the sender and the receiver, they might have encode and decode things differently. And I wanted to show this video first before moving on.
Wichtigste Gerät ist Küstenwächter. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Okay, this is something I explore with my students. Well, it's second language. Either one, well, if you speak a second language or when we are dealing, negotiating in a second language, speaking in a second language or English as a second language, we have to be careful with encoding, decoding, sender, receiver, and we talk a lot about that. So communication styles, how do we communicate? So being careful when we talk, the use of idioms, the use of slangs, jargons, the nonverbal communication, how cultures, they vary in the use of proxemics. Before studying abroad, for example, the proxemics, and it's interesting, the distance, it also is part of business, how people get closer or farther apart. When I take students to Brazil, people get, it's only like 6 inches apart instead of 3 feet, 6 feet apart. It's very close. So that's part of it's part of, well, how people, it's part of communication too, right? So that's very interesting. And the use of foreign language, how people speak slowly or louder, and we explore that a lot. And I think this has a very big impact on students, especially, and they share a lot of their examples. Some of them, not the majority, I think I would say about 20% of my students, they speak a second language, but they share a lot of their experiences too. When they traveled, when they speak the second language here. So I think that's very helpful. We also use some cases, for example, the Rakuten case, which is a company in Japan that decided to change their language from Japanese to English. So what is the impact of that? So language is not a very superficial thing. It has it brings a lot of changes on how language is, how people behave. It has to do with all these cultural dimensions we were talking about, on status, on, especially when we were talking about Japan, status, on relationship, and so on. So the impact on the language, it causes an impact on culture too. So we use some cases to highlight language, and also stereotypes on language. So this is an interesting chapter. We talk 3 or 4 classes just about language in international business. So I don't teach language, but I have a lot of cases to share because English is my second language. So we talk a lot about this. And one of the things that we talk also is about, I use some of the TED Talks that I am also sharing with you. One of these is from Lara Boroditsky, which is how language shapes the way we think. I love this TED Talk. So all my students watch this TED Talk too, together with this chapter, with this conversation about language and coding, decoding, communication problems. And I recommend you watching this TED Talk. It's really highlighting, and some of other TED Talks. So the other thing that I use for culture is, well, to keep us updated. There is a new book on Amazon from Trump and Ars. It has to do with COVID and how cultures are dealing with COVID based on culture. So I also added here the link for you. So concerning these topics about foreign language, English as a second language, I always ask my students to give recommendations to the next students who are coming to my class for the next semester. And what students say about that, I would like to share this video from Caitlin. She was my student about 3 years ago. And I don't say anything. I just said, can you record a video with recommendations for the next students coming? And she mentioned the language, how impactful that was for her. So I decided to show these for you.
Hi everyone, my name is Tinklenberg, and I graduated from Kelley in May of 2019 with a major in finance, technology management, and international business. Today, I'm an analyst at Peloton Consulting Group, where I help US and international firms implement Oracle Financials Cloud. I took Professor Kovacs' D312 class back in the fall of 2018, and I really enjoyed her class. One of the things that I took away from it was this idea of cross-cultural communication process, how things are encoded and decoded differently. It was really interesting to me. And one of the things that Professor Kovacs is going to recommend, and if she doesn't, then I'm recommending it right now, is the book, The Culture Map by Meyer. It was one of my favorite books that I read in college, and I ended up presenting it to my company's women's network, just as part of one of our monthly presentations that we do. And my company actually loved it so much that we started to introduce it into our diversity and inclusion initiative as a discussion on cultural diversity. So my company has a team in India, and so I thought that it was really important for us to have this discussion of how business is done differently in India, how people communicate differently, and having that awareness and understanding that maybe the way that we communicate as Americans may not always translate the way that we intend to someone in a different country. And so a couple of things that I would take away from the course to do well in it. I know you've probably heard this a million times before, but definitely read the material before the week starts, take notes, put things in your own words so you have a better understanding of the material, of the vocabulary, because there is going to be a lot of terminology that you're going to have to remember. And then also, and one of the things that I could have done better at, honestly, was reading the case material a little more thoroughly. I think there are definitely going to be questions on case material, on exams, but also it's really helpful to have kind of that real world application to what you're learning for. And so I hope everyone has a great semester. Go Hoosiers.
Okay, now I'm seeing that there were some questions at on the chat. Yes, there is a charge for, yes, for Globesmart. Yes. I don't know, but Christine already answered. Thank you, Christine. Yes. The other activity that I like using, which is kind of always every semester we get these course evaluations, and they always mention the Axion activities and the Legos as some of the activities that they really enjoy and that they learn a lot. They always have a goal. We always debrief a lot about these activities. Well, the second one is these Legos. So this Lego activity I do with the communication chapter. So I give the students some Legos. So they read the chapter about communication, encoding, decoding before sender, receiver. And well, when they arrive in the class, and I did that in the virtual environment too. In the virtual environment, we set a time, they would go, we had some students in Bloomington, they would go to my office, pick it up, and then everything was sanitized. And then we had a box, they would drop it off, everything would be sanitized again. But then for the Legos, so they arrive in the classroom, we would have a box of Legos, and then we would have students who would use these blindfolders, as you can see here, student with blindfolder. Then we would have a coach, another student who would have the instructions for the Legos. And then we would have observers. So the student who had the instructions could not touch the Legos. The observer could not touch the Legos, and the blindfolded student would be the only one who could touch the Legos and who would have to assemble the Legos. So with that, well, that was an interesting task, right? It's about communication, and it's about sending, receiving. For example, we see a lot of mistakes like colors, shapes. So it's how we communicate based on what we see, not thinking about the receiver. So the debriefing was very interesting. And then we would bring that to international business. We would bring that to foreign language because the blindfolded person could not see the colors, could not see the shapes. So we were just thinking about ourselves when we were giving the instructions. And then we would also see a lot of mistakes on right or left. And for the other person, right and left would be the opposite side. And the observers would write everything. So the debriefing is always very interesting. It's like, yeah, well, when we communicate, we have to think about all those things. And then they go back to the reading, they go back to the cases, they go back to, okay, when we speak a second language, a lot of times we are only thinking about ourselves and we are not thinking about the slangs and the jargons, and it's, yeah, it's really enlightening. I really like this activity. And actually, to be honest, I learn a lot with my students in this communication. I learn a lot about slangs, and I learn about like idioms, euphemisms, because especially slangs. Well, this generation teaches me a lot about slangs. So I think this activity is very interesting. In the virtual environment, it was a little bit more challenging because seeing the pieces, seeing the parts on Legos was harder because of the environment, but it worked. But in person, it works much better than virtually. So, well, of course, as I mentioned, some of these activities, well, when we had to shift to the virtual environment, we had to be more creative. I was teaching online before COVID. I was already teaching, so some of the activities were already done online, but some of them I had to change, like this activity with the Legos or the Axion activity. Some are possible, some are not. But then with cultural diplomacy, we had space, we had room to be creative, and some of them, well, one activity that I would like to share is a virtual study abroad. I think when we were talking about cultural awareness and how we did study abroad and how we do study abroad at Kelley, and we had to shift, like in May of last year, May 2020, I was about to take students to Brazil, and we suddenly had to change. I was going to take them for 10 days in Brazil, and we suddenly had to change everything to virtually. There was a big shock, a big change to everyone. So all the 18 courses had to be virtual. I did the case competition virtual. We had guest speakers. But then there was a big opportunity, because I think until then it was you either study abroad or you either don't study. You either go or you don't go, right? So I decided to create last year this Z355. It's a virtual study abroad for a full semester. So if you think all our students who do a co-major international business, they are required to take a cross-cultural awareness requirement. And one of them is to study abroad. One of the ways to comply with the requirement is going abroad. And with COVID, they couldn't go abroad last year and they couldn't go abroad this year. So one of the ways we found was to take some other international business courses from other schools besides Kelley. So I created this one here. There was an interesting solution that I think it's, well, any institution, it's easy and it's doable. It's putting students together from 2 different countries in a virtual environment. So in this case here, and it was a virtual study abroad for 13 weeks. And it was very experiential. And the goal is to increase cross-cultural awareness by applying theory and practice, using theory about cross-cultural awareness, but putting students together from 2 different countries in a buddy system, working on a project. So when you have students from Kelley and you have students from a different country working on a project, not only they are learning about the theory, but they are applying those skills. Everything that we are using on Globesmart, everything that we are learning from the books, they have to apply that when they are working on this project. So leadership, communication, trust, they are working together for 13 weeks and experiencing that. While in some other courses, we are learning that in theory, they are working in some teams, but they don't have a project, like a real company project to work for such a long time. So that was a great experience. So I used actually it has to be different from the cross-cultural awareness course that I already had. So I used the culture map. Remember, my student even recommended that book, The Culture Map, which also talks about cross-cultural dimensions and cross-cultural. It's a great book, by the way. And then I also used Globesmart for these class. So as we went through the course, it was really interesting. So I had these Kelley students and Brazilian students for 13 weeks, twice a week on Zoom. So we had teams and we had a real company in Brazil with a real problem. So they had this problem and they had 3 presentations that they had to work together to find the solution for that problem. And there were a lot of conflicts because, well, Brazilians and my Kelley students, they had different ideas, they had different cultural dimensions, and they had to work on that. They had conflicts, they had different ways of trusting, they had different ways of how to decide, and we would debrief. So we would learn about communication styles. So for example, here we are more low context, while in Brazil is more high context. So they were applying, they were actually experiencing that in the project, and they were learning that in the theory, and we would debrief about that. Trust was very interesting because here we are very task-based. We would get straight into business. do the project, while in Brazil, trust is very relationship based. So when the students met, they wanted to know about their families, they wanted to know about the COVID situation, and that was very different. So no right or wrong, just different. And we would debrief about that. So that was an amazing experience. I think both students, Brazilian students, Kelley students, they grew a lot in this semester. And so that's how we worked throughout the semester. Leadership, decision, top down or consensual, scheduling. Brazilians are much more flexible in time, so they would be a little bit more late. And here is very scheduled. Okay, meeting is going to start at 1, it's going to finish at 2. Brazil is okay, we're going to start at 1, but we don't really have time to finish. Or they would deliver the projects right at the end. So that was a big difference for them. So what students said, we just finished that in the spring. There was a pilot, first time that we offered. We did a course evaluation, and we have some criteria. In terms of cultural awareness, that's how the course was called, cultural awareness, doing virtual study abroad in Brazil. I feel I learned a lot in this course. This course was evaluated by students, Kelley students, in 6.5 when we compare to the average of the school, 6.1. So students learned a lot in this course, especially on cultural awareness. So putting students together with students from a different country was really a good idea. Second criteria, all things considered, I have benefited from taking this course. This course got 6.4, was above the average of the school, 6.2. So they learned a lot, and they have benefit, even though the virtual study abroad, it was a virtual, they benefited a lot from taking this course. And I got emails from students, they want to study abroad. Some of them now, they got interested, they learned some words in Portuguese. It opened their mind for the world and for international. And this is what I got from one of the students too. I felt like this online study abroad program had allowed me to gain that experimental learning process through actually implementing theories learned from the book with a diverse teamwork. Meanwhile, the case project is really engaging, and the cultural experience is very fascinating given the fact that it's 100% virtual. So this is a way of breaking walls, having more cultural awareness, and yes, even though, especially if students cannot travel abroad for any reasons, financial reasons, or if they are afraid of traveling, if they don't have time, if they have to work, if they are committed with other things, family reasons. So this is a very good option. And actually this course got an innovation award last week at IU, at Indiana University. They granted an award for the innovation courses, innovation initiatives during COVID, and this was one of them. So with that, we got some of these learning outcomes for these virtual study abroad. So they developed all these skills in terms of international business, different cultural environments, self-awareness. They applied communication skills, cross-cultural communications. They experienced different leadership styles, different types of teamwork, and they also created a social impact. So this is pretty much what I had to say. I would mention that, well, especially Globesmart has been an amazing tool, putting students together, using their experiences, engaging them, but of course, having them accountable too. We use that, all these activities, the Legos, the Legos activities, the axioms, it all has some literature behind, they all have some theory behind. They have to come prepared. Before each class, they have to do an assignment, they have to do a quiz on Canvas or an open assignment, so that it shows what we are learning from that. It's not just a fun activity. It has a learning purpose on that.
Erica, thank you so much for a very, very illustrated and insightful presentation. We are now open for questions. Fortunately, we will really have, instead of 30 minutes, we'll have 45 minutes of Q&A. So please feel free to raise your hand and ask the question. And I request again that each person restrict his or her question to just one question so that others will have a chance. Incidentally, this is also your time to express your reaction to the presentation in 3, 4, 5 words. Please enter it in the chat box. So, all right, we're ready for questions now.
I wonder where he's at now.
Can't hear you. Are you muted? Maybe you can type the question in the chat box. All right, maybe we can take another question and come back to that person whose voice we are not able to hear clearly. Next question, please. Still, we can't hear you. I don't know. Is Ryan, is there a problem with our audio or anything?
Doesn't seem to be.
Ryan, please come on.
Yep. No, it doesn't seem to be.
We can hear you at least.
Yeah, I think it's.
But we are not able to hear the participants who are asking questions.
I'm going to say something. I hear some comments about the virtual study abroad. I forgot to mention something. Also, to increase the awareness, what we did also was some cultural activities. So, for example, not only they would work on this project, but we also did some two. One was a cooking, well, because we wanted to have them experience as if they were living there, or have the cultural experience. So the working experience was there, but some of the culture wouldn't be there, would be missing. So what we did was a cooking workshop. So we all cooked together. The Brazilian students, Kelley students, we had to prepare some food in the classroom. We were in our kitchen, so we had to cook some Brazilian food. Then we had also a capoeira workshop, which is also a kind of a workout cultural dance. So we learned about it together too. I also did it. It was tough.
We have road passes.
And then the other thing that we did was the students, they had an activity where they would get together, Kelley and Brazilian students, and they would pick a theme, for example, food or family or school, and they would make a video. So make a video comparing, for example, how is house? How do you live in Brazil compared to how you live in the US? Or how is breakfast in Brazil compared to breakfast in the US? Or how is your university? And they made some videos which were really interesting because they could, for example, they would take for granted, like in the EU, it was very interesting because my students like, oh, professor, I don't believe how they don't have the yellow bus picking up Brazilian students, right? How they don't have the yellow bus picking up elementary schools. No, we don't have the yellow bus in Brazil. So some things that we take for granted that other countries have, they learned in those videos. That education is different, that food is different, the way people learned was different. Oh, Annette was asking what was the cost of the virtual study abroad program? The cost for the students or the cost for the university, Annette? For the student, we were able to, for the students, it didn't cost anything, right? We were able to find some funding for internal fund because it was a pilot. So for the students, it didn't cost anything, but we had to pay a partner in Brazil to find the students. It was about, I would say about 7,000, right? So that was the cost of it. Yes, to get this number of students. But for example, if you remove the cooking workshop, if we remove the capoeira workshop, the highest cost is to recruit the students there, to recruit and to find the company. That's the thing about the recruit, and having the students is it's a must. You have to have these students. Yeah, and if you would like to know they have companies in Brazil, they have in Europe, they have in Africa, they have so you can do it all over the world. And it depends on what you would like with cooking or yes. Or for example, if you want with students or less students. So I think it's kind of, you can adjust the price accordingly.
Right, any other question?
So if you're going to transfer that for the students, it will be a fine. Oh, Mark has a question. Mark, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. Did you have students from different, for this virtual class, did you have students from different institutions in the one class, or did you team up with one university abroad? It's a fascinating, great idea. Thank you very much for sharing it. Thank you, Mark.
Actually, yes, I had they were from 10 different universities, actually. Yes, they were from 10. So this company it's kind of a 3B corporation. So they are educational. They are, it's kind of an education company, company in Brazil. They would recruit from different regions because we also wanted diversity in this program. And I would say at least 45% of these students, 45 to 50% were from minority groups in Brazil. So they wouldn't have any chances of studying abroad because they were from very poor regions in Brazil, from the Northeast, but they would have to speak English. So that was a requirement. So they searched for that. They had English in their elementary, or at the university, they had English in high school, but they were from, for example, I had 3 or 4 from the Northeast, which is like poor region, one of the poor regions. So they had this job of recruiting these students. I didn't want a heterogeneous group, right? Everybody from the best or the top university in São Paulo. No, that wouldn't be the ideal. We wanted different regions so they would learn the most. And even the Brazilian students were learning from each other because they had diversity in regions and so on. Yeah. So
in my home institution, I've been there for many years. We've talked so many times about trying to make study abroad a requirement for the degree. And of course, I teach at a kind of a, middle-class university, so to speak. Of course, the cost is always the issue. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to make something like this available to every single student and is very doable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Yes. Yeah, and you see that they learned a lot, right? They learned, and that's what I heard from them. And I was waiting for the course evaluations. Yes, that's exactly the organization. Yes, Christine, that's Campus B. Yes, that's exactly it. Yes, they
Okay,
work with a lot of universities here. Yes.
Next question. You can either raise your hand or type it in the chat box. This is for the people who are participating. We try to make these conferences as interdisciplinary as possible, although Erika is teaching in the School of Business, especially international business and cyber. All of these things are available and useful to people in history, political science. We need to help our students to cross cultural barriers. They don't know who they will work for, whether the person who they will work for will speak with the accent or will have a different pronunciation. So this can be used in communication courses. This can be used in history courses. This can be used in a speech course and debate course. Especially, the idea of communication across cultures is so critical. I remember taking a group of Fulbright professors to Japan, and we were invited by Toyota, and 15 of us were there. We went to Toyota, and it was interesting for me to watch because I'm myself from a different cultural background, having been born and raised in India and having been here in the United States. As many of you know, the Japanese culture is more a listening culture than a talking culture. So as much as I learned to watch football, I tried to apply one of the techniques in football called time of possession. I said, I have 15 people. I want to see how long the Americans speak and how long the Japanese speak. 15 Japanese were there. Only one of them spoke on behalf of all the 15. In the case of Americans, all 15 of us spoke. And the Japanese were much more interested in listening rather than in speaking. And one of the contentious questions was, you don't use too many American-made parts in Japanese cars. Can you explain to us why? And I want you to see how diplomatic the Japanese were. When we try to put a Japanese part next to an American part, there is not as much harmony between the two parts as we would like to have. And coming as I do from America, and I hope you'll forgive what I'm going to say next, God damn it, how much harmony can you have between two metal parts that are inanimate? But this is how they try to be diplomatic about answering questions. And I thought it was a very, very interesting answer, that why you need harmony between the two parts that need to fit into the car. So these are also questions. And here is another cultural thing. I took a group of American professors to India. American professors are used to having coffee before the breakfast. And we would be in a big hotel, a 5-star hotel, and somebody would say coffee, and the guy would say, yes, they're coming, yes, they're coming. But he would never bring the coffee until after the breakfast is over, because that was the local cultural tradition to have coffee after the breakfast. So there are many things our students need to know as we become more and more a multicultural society. Let me stop here and see if this window provides an opportunity for somebody to ask another question, please. Please type the question in the chat box, or you can put your hand up and ask the question.
Yes, Raj, and I think that for regardless of the field, like regardless of the area we are going to teach, this is a skill that our students
very
need
valuable
to learn.
skill for employment
Yes.
and interview.
Yes, so I really recommend the book that my students mentioned. That's the student that I use here, the Culture Map, is a book that we all should read. Like, it's a book that I give to a lot of my friends, like who are not in academia, just friends. The Culture Map is amazing because even when dealing with our neighbors, when dealing with our friends with different backgrounds, it's a book that it's important for our life. So it's understanding different cultures. So regardless of our field, yes. Oh, okay. This is an interesting question. How did you reconcile the time differences in our virtual classes? It was only 2 hours for a certain time. It was 1 hour, and then it changed for 2 hours. And there was also 3 hours too, because Brazil changes summertime. And then, so it wasn't that bad because my class was at 11:30 in the morning. So we already knew in advance. When I created the syllabus, that was in November of last year, November, and then classes started in January. So it was 2 months in advance. We already knew the time change. So when we sent we kept the time here at Kelley, and we changed the time in Brazil. So we couldn't change the schedule here because of, yeah, it was our calendar at Kelley, and then we changed in Brazil. So that's what happened. And then when they recruited the students, they already knew the time. So they had to be available, for example, at 1 p.m. from January to February, and then there would be 2 p.m. from February to March. They knew the calendar. But that can be an issue if you are dealing with a 12-hour difference or 6 hours. So this is something very important to be taken in consideration, Damaris. Yes, this is important, the time difference. In Brazil, it isn't bad because, yeah, 1, 2, or 3 hours, depending on how much.
All right. Next question, please. If you don't have a question, I'm going to fill in some gaps, and all of these are related to the topic at hand.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I have 2 questions here in the chat.
Okay, go ahead.
What challenges did you encounter? Oh, I had many challenges, Carlos. I had team challenges. So I would say I had issues in the teams, and they were issues because of cultural differences. So I had issues in 2 teams. So it was interesting because one of the dimensions is feedback. So one of the teams met with me, and they had an issue with one Brazilian teammate. So it was right before the feedback dimension. So how I handled, that was the question. So first, it's like, okay, Professor, we want to meet with you. We have an issue with a Brazilian teammate. Okay, let's meet. I just met the Kelley students, not the Brazilian students. And they told me what was going on. Oh, he's always late. He's always talking about his family. He's not going straight to the point. And it was a great debriefing moment. I was like, okay, next class is about feedback. You were going to read the chapter about feedback, and you were going to have feedback opportunity. Do you want me to talk to him? This is a do you see any cultural differences in terms of time? We are studying about cultural dimensions. Do you think this is a personal thing? And then I threw the questions to them. And then they realized it was a cultural difference, and they had to address that as a feedback topic. And actually they handled it. And it was very interesting, Carlos, to see how they grew as a team with time. And we had a peer evaluation. So they had 3 presentations, and in every presentation they had a peer evaluation. So the Brazilians would evaluate the Brazilians, and the Kelley students would do a peer evaluation. And the peer evaluation was an important component of the grade. So they had to address these issues. Otherwise, they would have a bad grade. So it was interesting. That was one time. So I said, do you want me to talk to them, or do you want to handle it with the feedback topic? And they gave the feedback to him. And then he met me, the other student, and it was a great feedback session. The other time, I think that was one of the best classes I've ever had in my life, was a trust issue. When we went to the trust topic, because I had a problem with another team with one student, because Brazilians trust based on relationship, it's affective trust. And and once again, this is, if you are teaching history, if you are teaching language, if you put students together who trust differently, if you don't address that, you're going to have issues. So Brazilians trust effectively, and my Kelley students would trust based on cognitive trust. So they were not trusting each other. They were not trusting because they didn't realize this difference. And when we reached the trust chapter, and then when they read that, and they had to write, once again, they had to write about it before the class. When I read the assignment, I was like, oh, this is going to be a great class. So when I read the assignments, I knew what to ask. So I think, well, one of the students almost cried that, well, we cannot trust each other. And then one of these students said, well, now I understand my teammate. She wants to talk about her family, and we are being very inflexible. We are not understanding the cultural differences. So there was another issue that I had to deal with, but I was prepared because I read the assignment, and the team was mature enough to deal because they read and they understood the cultural differences. But yes, there were many problems because of this cultural, working in cross-cultural teams for such a long time with such big differences, it's not easy, right? So yes, but it was interesting. And actually I got the feedback from Campus B too. There was a person in my classes sometimes, and they said there was one of the best synergy between the teams because of how these cultural dimensions were handled and how how the teams grew throughout the time because of these debriefings and so on. So yeah, wanted to confirm the time availability was the time, Ryan, you mean the time availability of the class, or the time availability of the, can you?
Yeah, like with, the question about, how managing the time difference for the students. And you mentioned, the Kelley students, I know our calendars are pretty tight as far as class schedules go. So I'm assuming from your comment that the time availability shift for the Brazilian students, that was all kind of handled through the recruitment company when they were outreaching for students. That was one of the criteria, right? Was, this is the time that you need to be available, and they managed kind of handling that time difference and that availability for those students.
Yes, that was correct. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, that was also a good thing, like they handled that. And I had one student who had to drop, a Brazilian student who had to drop. And they also handled finding another student to replace that one. Because for me, it would be an issue having 9 students instead of 10. So that was also part of the recruitment company. So I thought, well, I need 10. So if this student has to drop, can you find another one? I can handle like boarding the student, having the student meet the group, giving support for the theory and everything, but I need 10. So, but they also handle the recruitment for an extra and so on. But yeah, the time management was all on them. Okay, I'm looking here at the chat. Oh, technology. Yes, Jennifer, that was a good question too. Was technology ever a problem in the virtual study abroad? Yes. Yeah, I would say, especially in Brazil, as I mentioned, yes, I had students in like different regions, in like poor regions in Brazil, and they had technology issues. So it's a requirement in my classes that students have the cameras on because we need to communicate. That's part of the trust. But in this case, they would be like being kicked off Zoom and coming out. So it's like, okay, no cameras off, no cameras on. You can have your cameras off. They would be on and out of Zoom. Yeah, there is no secret. Yes, technology would be an issue in Brazil sometimes.
Well,
yes.
even here, one of the participants says that she's having internet problems. So it's not just because of Brazil. It is also in any city. I don't take technology for granted at all in any kind of meeting like this.
Yes. No. Exactly. Well, it happens sometimes. Well, it happens. Sometimes you don't have power. Sometimes Yes, you don't have internet. So yes, I had to handle that. Sometimes it happened too with, yes. But I would say in Brazil it was much more frequent than with my students here. And I had to be tolerant, right? Well, yes, it happens. Yes.
Okay, next question. Well, as somebody submits a question, I want to take about 2 minutes to read something to you. Here is a sneak preview for existing and new programs for the academic year 21-22. In collaboration with the Indiana University Center for the Study of Global Change and other NRCs, we will start fall 2021 semester with a conference on approaches and best practices to internationalizing the social science curriculum. And this will be followed by separate programs throughout the year on integrating international and area studies perspectives into humanities courses, education courses, business courses, so on and so forth. In addition to our current target audience of faculty members, such as the program in which you are participating, we are also starting 2 new virtual programs for students in the honors and business programs at our consortium and other schools. These are a visiting diplomat program and an excellence in international leadership program. We would appreciate it very much if you will work with and talk to appropriate officials on your campus to make these programs successful. Some of you may have received from me a 2-page attachment to the communication I sent you with the Zoom link. One is we have already finalized the Consul General of Switzerland to be a virtual visiting diplomat during the fall semester. And this will be followed somebody from Argentina who will talk about the international cross-cultural excellence in leadership, a person who has worked for CNN and Warner Brothers and other things in Argentina. And we will also have a lady who is the vice president for YKK Zipper, the largest the largest zipper maker in the world. And they have headquarters here in Atlanta. So we want you to know that we are rolling out some new programs, and some of you may say, Raj, you're biting more than what you can chew, but one of these days I won't be able to chew and I will stop at that point. But these programs are coming your way, especially for those outside Georgia. I do not have an individual or a specific contact on your campus. Please call and talk to me because you have participated in our program. You know the value that we add. Put me in touch with the right people. Just like this program, we want students from across the 2 time zones, at least Eastern and Central time zone. And to start with, we are offering as many as 15 slots for a combination of business and other academically talented students with a grade point average of 3.5. Being quite aware that we really can't serve all the students from all the universities. So this is how we are starting. Let me stop here and turn it over back to questions.
There is one question here from Alex. So do you provide orientation on things considered taboo in society, in the Brazilian society? Well, we do Globesmart about Brazil. We do together, right? Brazil in the US, and we talk together, yes, what not to, and they learn not only from me, but they learn from Globesmart, and they learn from the Brazilian students too. So yes, what not to talk about in Brazil, what would be a stereotype in Brazil, what gestures not to use in Brazil, especially, well, not only in this class, but before traveling to Brazil too. Yes, exactly, Raj, you know. Yes, no. Yeah, this is very bad in Brazil. You should never do this. So yeah, they learn that. Yes, and it's interesting because sometimes they learn more than with the students than from me because they are the same age. I've been outside of Brazil for a few years, so things change, slang change. So it's interesting. They learn so much from each other. They're the same age, same generation. Yes. There isn't, Gabriela, if you can share the headquarters information in Atlanta, I will definitely try to get a program for my, yeah, that's interesting, yes. Spanish students.
I want to add to what Erika is saying here. One of our most underutilized resources in any college, small or big or medium sized, our international students are very shy, and they are, to me, the most valuable resource on the campus with regard to cross-cultural understanding. The more we can make them stand up and talk about how they look at American culture and society through their cultural lens, and how Americans look at their society through their own cultural lens, can go a long way in promoting mutual understanding between various cultures.
Yes. And Hans, I can share my syllabus with you. I can send my syllabus to your email so you can share with the participants too.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Any other question? Let me diverge for another 2 minutes to share something. For especially those of you who are from outside Georgia participating in this program, our consortium has been around for nearly 28 years. This is the kind of service we provide. Since we cannot reach the students directly, we bring people like you who are an interdisciplinary group of faculty members to programs like this. The purpose of this program is not the focus on business or international business. All of you come from different disciplines. The purpose of this program is what ideas, concepts, methods, techniques, comparisons, and illustrations that we can take away from presentations of the program that we are having today, that we can integrate into the general education courses we teach without starting a new course in cross-cultural communication or a new course in something else. Because A, we don't have the financial resources, B, we don't have the personnel, and C, our universities will not allow us to increase the number of hours for graduation. So basically, it is something that you can take away from these presentations to use in the existing courses that you teach, so that we can increase the knowledge, understanding, and awareness of students, specifically those who will not major and minor in international relations or international studies, because that is where small colleges and universities are. They don't have the luxury of offering area studies programs or global studies programs. So we just have to keep that in mind. It could be a student in nursing. It could be a student in some other program. So, for example, my wife had a knee surgery. We went to Emory University Orthopedic Surgery Hospital. We saw nurses from Philippines, and we also saw a lot of nurses from India. And their challenge was that a lot of people come who don't understand the cultural differences, and how wonderful it would be for a department of languages to be able to work with these various hospitals and try to create a situation where they can serve as a language interpreter or something. So there are so many valuable ways in which we can contribute to the overall economic development, which many academics may not agree with me. Yeah. Next question, please. Erika, I have a question for you. I'm assuming, just like I am originally from India and came to this country, I'm a naturalized American. I'm assuming you came from Brazil to the United States. Does having a bicultural background provide you a greater advantage to be able to teach a course like this, as opposed to somebody who was born and raised in this country, went to school entirely here?
Well, I think so. Right. I think, well, I don't know if it brings me a bigger advantage, but I think it gives me a different perspective, right? You think it brings me a different perspective? First, especially when I'm teaching about language, English is a second language. It's like, hey guys, it happens to me. If you speak, when you make a baseball joke in the middle of a negotiation, I'll never understand, because I'll never understand baseball. So be careful when you are doing international business or you're traveling, don't make any baseball jokes. I'll never get it, right? So or my experience, I see things in a different way. It's not better or it's not worse, it's just different. So I think I'm just in a different position, right? In a different perspective. I lived in Fargo, North Dakota. I lived in Atlanta. I've worked in different countries. So I think it's different, yes. And I'm passionate about that. Yes, so I think and speaking a second language also is different, and working in a second language is different too. So yeah, I would say yes, it's different.
Thank you. Thank you.
And taking students to my country too. Well, I take them to other countries. I take them to, as I mentioned, to the Netherlands. I take them to Greece. But taking them to my country, taking them to Brazil, I think it's an amazing experience for me and for them too. Like, this is my culture. This is where I was born. This is like, it's interesting. It's good for them, good for me. Actually, I have students who traveled with me and now who are working for Brazilian companies here in the US. Like, oh, I got this job because I traveled to Brazil with you. I went to the study abroad program. So I think then it brings a different advantage, yes.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions.
Oh, I have one question here from Ileana, right? Were students partnered randomly? No, they were not. I assigned them, different, when I assign them in groups, I make sure that I pick the different, when I assign them on groups in Canvas, that they have different majors and co-majors. So I try to put one student who is a finance major with a marketing major, so I try to put them in different diverse groups. And also from Brazil, different regions as well, different regions, gender, diversity too. In this case, I didn't have many, like sometimes when I split my groups in other classes, I would have different nationalities. So I try to put them in diverse groups in terms of nationalities. But in this case, I only had one international student. Besides Americans, Brazilians, I only had one student from Thailand. So, but I would try to put them diverse, yes. Yes, Anna, yeah, I totally agree. Cultures are not better or worse, they're just different, right? They are just different. And that's why I always emphasize, we just have to respect the differences. Like it must be very, and sometimes we don't understand that. Yes. And we tend to sometimes criticize, like, oh, this culture is like this. No, guys, it's just different. So don't judge, don't criticize. There's no worse or better. It's just differences. And we have to respect them, and we have to be open to understand. So whenever you find somebody from a different culture, be curious, be open-minded, talk to them, and understand those differences. You learn a lot. You learn a lot from these differences.
We have time for one more question. As we wait for the question in the chat box, I want to share with you that anecdotal experiences are not the best for scholarly pursuit, but here is a situation where an English professor checked into a Japanese hotel, and he talked to the front desk clerk. He said, sir, you are from America. I want to practice English. And is it okay if while you are here staying in our hotel, can I practice some English with you? And he said, oh, absolutely, there is no problem, And he said, by the way, give me a wake-up call at 6 o'clock in the morning. And here comes 6 o'clock, and this professor is sleeping, and the front desk calls and says, sir, your time has come. Which should be an interpretation, you are ready to pack and leave this world. And the professor jumped out of the bed and said, so I think, here, for example, in America, use the expression, it's raining cats and dogs. And if you would go and talk to your student in India, who'd be really looking for cats and dogs to rain, So be very careful about the idiomatic expressions that we use. What is easily understood in one culture is not easily understood in some other culture. Especially our international students have difficulty with those things, especially during their first semester or two. After that, they become, I would say, Americanized very quickly.
Oh, Raz, I've been here for a few years, many years, I don't know, like a few years, but I'm still lost in translation. I would say last year I had some water in my living room, and my neighbor was like, "Oh, Erica, you should call the shingles company." And I didn't want to ask her what is a shingles company, so I googled shingles. Right? It was a disease. I was like, okay, who am I going to call? So you take for granted that everybody understands that shingles would be the asphaltic shingles. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry, I don't understand what is shingles. It was like, it was a shingles asphaltic. So it's like, you have to be careful. Even it's not only the students, faculty, like we don't understand. So we have to be very careful. It was like, okay, and then she explained, oh, it's asphaltic shingles. Like, got it. So yes. I'm still lost in translation sometimes too.
Very good. We got 2 more minutes, and I'm going to try to see if I can close this session. Erica, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. For those of you in the audience, Erica already sent me a copy of our PowerPoint presentation in advance. But as a matter of practice, we wait until the conference is over to send the PowerPoint presentations to all of you, so that you could continue, your attention can continue to be riveted on the presentation during the presentation. So please excuse me, you will get a copy of this PowerPoint very soon. In the remaining minute or so, if you arrived late, please enter in the chat box your last name and first name and your institutional affiliation. And also, this is also the time to record your impressions in 1, 2, or 3, or 4 words. Erica, again, thank you very much. We appreciate it. This has been a wonderful, wonderful presentation. We hope we can bring you back for future programs.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Yes, thank you.
All right, we are going to break for 15 minutes of refreshment. Unfortunately, this is a virtual conference. We won't be serving any refreshments to you, but you can go to your refrigerator or get a cup of coffee or whatever it is. We have our next presentation on changing business terrain of post-apartheid South Africa by Dr. Alec Lichtenstein, professor in the Department of History at Indiana University. We will regroup and begin promptly at 10:45. Thank you. Bye. See you in 15 minutes.